Is that your friend?
Is it Eileen? I can't see from here.
Can't tell.
Doesn't look like her.
No, doesn't
Look
well,
like her. I mean, I can't.
We shot her
barely
wedding
tell.
a long time ago.
No, I know what she looks like though.
Eileen and Joe. I don't remember her that well, but
I don't know.
Let's get her started.
this is, I can't keep thinking of the joke. What do you call a woman with one leg? Eileen. just it was just like a worm in my brain. I couldn't stop it. All right, so welcome tonight to the second official VFF meeting in the Rabbit Room. We're so excited to have this.
I mean,
place.
technically just rabbit room.
Did I say the I'm
A
sorry,
rabbit
a
room.
rabbit
Oh,
room?
I'm sorry, a rabbit room.
Yes, so
It
it's
just sneaks the A there for rabbit room.
Rabbit
well,
room.
so no
In
definite
rabbit
or
room.
indefinite article. Let's just go Rabbit Room. In Rabbit Room, although it sounds
In rabbit room.
it sounds like
Or grammar.
or grammar.
We are in rabbit room.
Cheap stuff or good stuff cheap.
La rabbit room.
La Rabbit Room.
La rabbito romo.
And we are at Drinklings in Wilmore, that's awesome. I love that they're open till 8 so that we can support them while buying drinks instead of Randy giving us a building and coffee for free. It's fantastic that we can help pay back a little bit. So this is the second installment of Out of the Silent Planet. And we'll start out with some of your thoughts, and we'll just go through and have some readings, and just whatever you guys want. I do have a question for the two sci-fi guys, if they were able to suspend their belief enough to enjoy the book. Okay.
I'm just enjoying it
Yeah.
since I was a kid.
I know.
The sci-fi guys. Is that a podcast?
It's actually Last Man Standing. It's was it Rai Rai and Kai Kai, the sci-fi guys?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that was good.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
I don't know where that came from.
Oh, I can't believe you remember that.
All right, so second installment. Probably should have gotten through 2/3 of the book by this point if you haven't read it already. So I don't care to go into more things, that even to the end of the book and what we can do all that. Caitlin is wanting a third installment of this because she has a lot she wants to get through. And if she would have come tonight, she would have carried most of the group probably. So I want to give her a chance to come in and share what she has. So
I got I'm eager to know what she's so turned up about.
well, she loved the end of the book, and she's already started Paralandra.
Yeah, okay.
So
Well, then,
Classic Caitlin.
yeah, your classic.
I'll
She's
blow through them all by tomorrow.
yes.
Probably, especially if she was home with Roman.
So just impressions on second half of the book. Did he get going a little bit better? Do you feel like he has a direction now? You're past. All right, we're already in space, so I can let go of the spacecraft and the physics part of it. How do you like the planet? What about Weston and Devine? Has your feelings about them changed any? The creatures on the planet. What do you think about that? And so yeah, just your overall impressions of the second and third of the book.
Yes.
Yes.
I liked
We're done.
how at first Ransom was... Well, he knew he definitely didn't like the Sorn. And then when he first saw the Hross, he wasn't too sure about them either, but then by necessity having to insert himself totally within their culture and learning their language and realizing that they were good beings. I can't say good people, but good beings. And intelligent beings and thoughtful and beings that you want to emulate.
Yeah.
A lot. And I've only gotten just as far as, well, he's in the company of the Sorn now. I haven't quite finished the book yet.
Okay.
So I've been listening to an audiobook, and it's frustrating because it only goes as fast as the person who's reading it, and sometimes I want to stop, and other times I want to
Yeah.
skip on it. There were a couple points there where it's like, I don't really want to listen to the next bit. I know it's going to be awful.
Right.
And it was, but it got to it.
Mm. Yeah, that's
I'm set on 1.25 speed.
I play it while I'm doing dishes and stuff like that, so my hands are wet, so I can't stop and switch the speeds or anything.
so. You played a little bit faster.
Yeah, there's two versions. One is a newer recording, and the newer recording has a good cadence, but the first guy like pauses for days between words sometimes, and I'm like, okay, I've heard this 1,000 times. I just want to get to the next part.
Right.
Stopping, just like dramatic pauses. So I play it faster.
Yeah, Jeffrey Howard. I think the guy's name is the reading that I'm listening to. He does a bunch of CS. Basically, the guy I listen to is, for me, C.S. Lewis.
Oh yeah, he does them all.
He does most of those, and I just love his voice. And so when I think of C.S. Lewis, I actually think of this guy's voice. And so it's kind of my C.S. Lewis is an amalgamation of that. And it's
you ever listen to his original, like, Mere Christianity?
Yes.
It's so jarring.
Yes, you don't have to be like, well,
here at the it's the very posh.
Like, oof, no.
Yeah.
I never imagined his voice to sound like that until I heard it, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, that kind of takes a little bit of it away, and then you see, Hopkins play him, and he plays him sort of somber, and that wasn't him at all. He was jovial all the time, and I'd like to see a jovial, Lewis. I'd like to see a guy joking.
He did so many practical jokes too.
Yes,
the jokester.
One of the best jokes, and if you guys read, I think it is in the beginning of Weight of Glory, Walter Hooper's introduction to Weight of Glory. Another reason why I don't always like introductions is Walter Hooper, when he writes them, basically writes 40-page introductions into the book, and it's like, and it doesn't really have to do with the book. It's just laying groundwork for people who don't know C.S. Lewis. It's an introduction to C.S. Lewis, and then here's the book. But he talked about C.S. Lewis's male nurse, that when Lewis decided to leave Cambridge, they went and got all of his books. And it was like, 5,000 books or 2,000 books. And there was nowhere to put them in the kilns because, well, C.S. Lewis kept everything and Warnie kept everything, so there wasn't much of room. And Alec was the male nurse, and he was asleep. And so they quietly stacked the books to the ceiling around the bed. And so when he woke up, he was completely encased in books. And he said it was the best damn practical joke he'd ever seen. And from that point on, he fell in love with Lewis and just, so that was the kind of character Lewis was. So that's a great point, what you brought up about the language, because the very first thing that you see when Lewis, or not when Lewis, I say all that, when Ransom, when he sees the Hross and it doesn't see him. I'm trying to get to the point where that is. I just underlined that a minute ago. Yes. Then something happened which completely altered his state of mind. The creature, which was still steaming and shaking itself on the bank and obviously not seen him, opened its mouth and began to make noises. This in itself was not remarkable, but in a lifetime of linguistic study, assured Ransom almost at once that these were articulate noises. Articulate. That's the difference. So I think this often goes understated. When we think of language, articulate noises, that's fine. But think about what language is. They are just articulate noises that we have come to understand are an allusion to, or a pointing to, an abstract thought or something that an experience we're trying to convey to another person that they can comprehend and understand. If you took a sentient being and you bring it to another sentient being, even though they're interplanetary, there is at some point going to be a crossover where you will be able to have articulate noises. That means that they can both be uttered with precision and understood with precision to the point where you can communicate. I think that's just amazing when we think about what language is in itself. And I know a lot of this because what I do in my rethinking thinking is we go back to the very beginning and say, do words have meaning? Let's start there. And then you have to go, what are words? And then you get to the point, you're like, so Lewis is pointing at this, and he's, what better hero to have at this interplanetary communication than a philologist who recognizes language immediately? Because had you not had that, then the language may have been seen as threatening, right? If you or I, who just showed up one day, and this creature we've never seen before makes a noise with his mouth, is it threatening? Is it going to attack us? But Ransom hears it and automatically goes, this is not just noise or din. He is expressing something. He is actually expressing an idea or a thought. I think that's fantastic. And the love of knowledge is a kind of madness. In the fraction of a second it took Ransom to decide that the creature was really talking, and while he still knew he might be facing instant death, his imagination had leaped over every fear and hope and probability of the situation to follow the dazzling project of making a Malacandran grammar, an introduction to Malacandran language, the lunar verb, a concise Martian English dictionary. He automatically went to the point where, like, oh, interplanetary dialogue. We can make a dictionary. We can figure this out. We can communicate, and we can just. His mind jumped right there, like, oh, we can do this. So, in my mind, he's going to be fine. Like, Ransom's going to be fine. He's going to figure out how to communicate with this guy, the Hross or Hross, just Hross, Ross, I think, which is like grunting in Beowulf, with the HR, that's probably a nod to Old English there with that. All right. I thought that keen observation on that, Miriam. Anybody else? What struck you in the second third of the?
You might buy one real quick. I totally had something written down on mine at home, and I forgot it. I forgot my book just sitting on the table, and I was really keen to bring it too, and I really wanted to keep it place. I really wanted to, because this is right exactly where we're at, actually. Oh yeah, that's it. You did it too. You got it too. Yeah, that's great, man. So he's talking about how he doesn't really know how to deal with this ominous creature when he first meets it. This is every now and then he has these sudden losses of confidence. And I love this part because I think it's actually a theme that goes throughout the entire book. He's talking about these losses of confidence. They arose when the rationality of the Hross tempted you to think of it as a man. Then it became abominable. A man 7 feet high with a snaky body, covered face and all, with thick black animal hair, and whiskered like a cat. But from the other end, you had an animal with everything an animal ought to have: glossy liquid eyes, sweet breath, the whitest teeth added to these, as though paradise had never been lost, and earliest dreams were true, the charm of speech and reason. Nothing could be more disgusting than one impression, nothing more delightful than the other. It all depends on the point of view. I think you got that last one too. I think that actually plays out in the theme throughout all three books. That it's actually about your point of view, and he does this not only with simple things like interspecies relations, but also with stuff like theological, philosophical concepts. Especially in Paralanda, he dives into this a lot whenever he's talking about the pre-fallen humanity. And it's fascinating because he kind of flips it around, all these things that we think of as, bad or we think of incorrectly, and he turns them on their head by saying, well, when you look at them through this lens, then you see what it is. And I think that he does that in a lot of his literature, but especially in this, it's almost like this trilogy is an exploration of looking at things from a heavenly point of view.
Yeah.
Because the entire bent is taking us to this perspective that there is much more to everything we think there is, and that our sphere, and this universe anyway, is dominated simply because of the fallenness of our race. And so it's just like this widening of view, and then when you see everything from this wider view, your lens changes, and it's like, even when you see truth, it's like, he talks about this in various places, when you see truth, like it's like looking at a fish from above the water. It's like, yeah, there's a fish down there, and I can see it, and I can understand it, but it's still, when I stick my hand in, it's like that, and it changes, and it's not actually where I think it is, because we're looking through something that's distorting our reality, but it's still there, and we can see it. And I just think that he starts that theme there and he just carries it through the whole way. It's awesome.
Yeah. And that's what literature like this does. It allows us to, as he says, steal past the watchful dragons. Because the watchful dragons are our prejudiced perspective that we already have. And if we're just given the facts of, hey, have a different perspective, we will automatically annihilate that because we think, my perspective creates a reality in which works. I don't suffer as much as I could. I prosper a little. Therefore, my perspective is quote unquote good, or at least somewhat optimal. If I accept your perspective, it may cause great suffering. I don't know. And so I'm not willing to accept it. So I will annihilate it. The analytical dragon in my mind will automatically incinerate that perspective because it presents harm to my perspective. But if you can steal past the watchful dragon and go into Malacandra and wrestle with the divine perspective, you can then bring it back and build and either reconfigure your paradigm or reshape your perspective without entirely destroying it and allow it to be broken in a sense. Or at least you know how better to build it up. You've seen, I don't have to get rid of everything. I've got a piece missing, like a potter. Let me smash it down again. I can reshape it and bring it up. And that is, and if you've read Lewis at any time, a great theme of Lewis's is language. It starts right here. Language, abolition of man, paralandra. I'm not going to ruin this, but that hideous strength. Language is a massive part of that transposition, weight of glory, language. And this probably stems from Kirkpatrick. You guys, some of you know the story, some of you don't. Lewis was going to be a student for William T. Kirkpatrick. He gets off the train in Surrey, and he's kind of I would say, he probably considered himself like a conversationalist. You know, he's trying to make himself feel at ease, and he just goes, the Surrey landscape is much wilder than I expected. To which William T. Kirkpatrick says, what do you know about the climes of Surrey? What information have you studied these? Are you from here? He said, no, I don't have any information. He says, then what gives you the right to make an opinion with no information? And Lewis said, that would have broken many people. But for me, it was red beef and strong beer. And he never forgot that. And Lewis never wastes a word. Everything he says is reasoned out. And so language is so important. And as Dumbledore would say, language, in my not humble opinion, is our greatest source of magic. And I think that's very true. So as we go through here, know that language, you're going to watch him use language, not in a manipulative form, but to get to as I think what David was saying, is a pure sense of this notion of, this is a language we use, but if we strip away all the erroneous pretense, we might get to perspective that illuminates and creates a more optimal world. In that, and he has this thing of, he has this also has this notion of, he loves talking animals. I mean, he loves it. He loves the talking animal. So, anybody else have any thoughts about what part of the book that you were like, this grabbed me, or hey, I like this, or I have a question about this? Those are also welcomed.
Thinking about the talking animals and how in this book it's all like the part you read that is kind of disgusting. In one point of view, it's kind of alarming and disgusting, but in Narnia, it's not at all. And part of it is like, I think we're used to seeing animals, so that the animal is not alien to us, but then to see an alien animal is already jarring enough. Eventually realizing that it's like speaking as human mannerisms is extra jarring, but then he flips it back. And I was also thinking about how he flips stuff upside down, and I was thinking about when Ransom is talking about how he imagines everything to be like the Sorn. Think of those to be like they're probably reptilian or disgusting or scary. It's like a lot of fiction or science fiction previously is even now tends to portray aliens as scary, as probably trying to harm us, and probably disgusting. It's like it's like we're projecting a lot of the darkness in our own world onto the perceived aliens that may or may not exist somewhere else in the universe, instead of thinking about them as possibly good and intelligent and smart.
I think you make a great point there, and I think Lewis would also back you up on that, because he actually says that he actually blames what you're talking about. He actually blames it on Wells here when he says, right here. But Ransom, thinking of the Sorns, for doubtless they were Sorns, those creatures they had tried to give him to, they were quite unlike the horrors his imagination had conjured up, and for that reason had taken him off his guard. They appealed away from the Wellsian fantasies to an earlier, almost infantile, complex fear: giant, ogres, ghosts, skeletons. Now, what he's pulling on here, I think, is he's pulling on giants and ogres are, in a sense, archetypal evils. The Wellsian evils are a bit more imaginative and not as, a little more grotesque, a little more, maybe we could say, and Lewis is not big on this, creating something fearful just to be more terrible. Like, you see these, I don't know, David, you can speak to this, where you create a movie just to be more terrifying, just to get the thrill of scaring someone. Instead of creating something truly terrifying, you manufacture something in a narrative to push the story along that we think might be more terrifying because it has more scales or it's taller or things like that. And Lewis is saying those things aren't really as scary if you see something real archetypally evil or like that. That's going to be really scary. He also points in, I think it's Mere Christianity, where he points to King Solomon's Mine. We've talked about this before, where King Solomon's Mine, the movie, actually has an ending in, I think, a volcano erupting and everybody being killed, and it's like the terror of that. And Lewis says that when you see the movie, it's the thrill of the scene on the screen. You're like, it's that kind of terror. In the book, for those of you that are going to read it, I'm going to ruin it. In the book, it ends with the guy being locked in the shaft of the mine and no one in there but him, and he can't, there's no way to get out, and so he just walks until his torch goes out, and then he just dies in there, being alone with no light and complete utter darkness, which is more terrifying, but not for the screen. Not to placate that part of the imagination, just wants to be terrified. But I don't know.
I think bad horror films do that. Good horror films incorporate both, but and also to your point, I think he actually ties this into a larger narrative too, like you're saying, talking about like projecting ourselves onto other things. Ransom projects not only figments of his imagination, but also societal structure and evil itself onto the planet and onto the sociological structures they're in. He's constantly looking for the division of, classes. He's constantly looking for who's in control. And I think it's a larger theme to this book. It doesn't come up as much in the others, to some extent, but like just this idea that we are bringing our darkness with us wherever we go, and whenever we see something or think about something or imagine something, we tend to imagine it with all the things that we bring with us. And it's funny though, because I think one of the things about films. I was just thinking about this as you're talking about aliens. Films, we honestly half the time the production design of a film is not based on what we would like it to be. When it comes to aliens, it's based on budget.
Right.
So like most of the time, whenever we create a creature on screen, it's like, what can we do for $10,000?
Right.
And then that's how we make it happen. Which is actually why the first Jaws is so much better than all the others, because they had to stick with not showing the creature as much.
Which one?
The first Jaws.
Oh.
The original is so much better.
Original.
Yeah.
Because your imagination was creating it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your imagination was creating it.
There's
All you saw was the
and
fin
the
up
music,
until the
or
end.
lack of music.
It's a bit of a letdown when you see the actual shark at the end. Even then, it was a bit of a letdown, but it's certainly let down now.
Da-da.
Do they show the aliens in Arrival?
Hmm?
Do they show the aliens in Arrival?
Kind of.
Yeah, kind of.
That was a good movie.
Yeah, it was a good movie.
And it's about communication and language.
Yeah. Also about time.
And yeah. So I was looking for to add to that. Oh yes, right here. But Ransom soon found that he was to have little leisure for observation, no opportunity for escape. The monstrous work of transferring food, clothing, and weapons, and many unidentified packages from the ship to the hut kept him vigorously occupied for the next hour or so in the closest contact to his kidnappers. But something he learned, before anything else, he learned that Malacandra was beautiful. But he reflected how odd it was that this possibility had never entered into his speculations about it. And that's exactly what you were talking about, is he had projected cold because of space, cold. I mean, he should have, because when he got into space, he thought space was going to be this void, and he got there and it was actually warm and full of teeming with life. So why would he think Malacandra would just be rocks and desolation? He gets there and suddenly it's teeming with life. And of course at this time we didn't have satellites that could, and Hubble telescopes and things like that. And so
If those are real.
if those are real, yes.
I want to play off of what David said about bringing our darkness with us. And you're speaking metaphorically, but Weston and some guy, Devine, they're doing that literally. They're bringing all their supplies and stuff with them, and you know that they can't possibly survive unless they've got their hut full of their supplies and stuff. Whereas Ransom, he goes running off, meets the Hross, and learns to live off the land. You know, it's, like you said, it's teaming with life, and with the proper instruction, by being willing to communicate with the beings of that world, he has learned how to make use of that land. Because when he's going on by himself up to meet with the Supreme Being, he's saying like, I need to print a copy so I can look at the names. I'm more visually reading instead of orally
Me too.
reading.
Well, Randy would be very proud, because that would go with his theme of industrialization being a sticking point for all of the Inklings here. Is, well, you're human. They're human too. No. This is our house. These are our stores. We've hoisted our thing upon this. And so I think that, Randy would be right here with you, adding on to that. And as I'll let Randy do that next time if he comes.
He was able to survive quite well, walking on his own without any provisions. He was just told, you need to go this way, and he went this way. And look for this grass or that, whatever, and make sure you eat before you get to this point, because supplies will be slim after that.
Oh, you're talking about the directions he's giving him?
The directions of Hross gave him when he set off on his own.
Yeah.
And eventually met up with Sorn, and then of course Sorn introduced him to 2 new ways of provisioning around the planet from their perspective.
Yeah, that's a good part. It's interesting. Yeah, the whole mindset in that scene as they're like talking is so interesting. This all comes from not listening to the Eldians, and then that Hross knows exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, we got to get back on the track. Here's what you do. You got to go now. And it's like, what? Like, from Ransom's perspective, it's like, this is no way. This is crazy. But he's like, no, it has spoken. We must do, and like that kind of just obedience is so foreign to him. I think even Ransom, even if he was like talking to a superior, he still would not feel that immediate desire to just obey. In this situation,
Without question.
Yeah, without question, just doing it.
We see the same thing in Silver Chair, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that is, I guess you could say that is a very human quality. Not beings that precede humanity, or beings that come after humanity, but humanity itself is that's a very quality. Aslan said it himself. But after I'm out of the presence of Aslan, the did he really say?
Yeah. Well, it's the garden right there.
Yeah.
It's just right straight back to the garden.
Yeah.
Did God really say?
So I want to throw this line out. You probably know, you may figure out why I'm throwing this line out, but for me this is confirmation of something, of one of my theses. But for you guys, I just want to throw out and see how you guys wrestle with this. Moreover, he knew nothing, yet well enough to see it. You cannot see things till you know roughly what they are.
Another thing. Helen Keller,
Okay.
when she first learned language,
Mm-hmm.
it was pumping the water. She knew what water was. She could feel it. She knew it's like there's stuff like that. But it wasn't until Annie Sullivan was able to spell the word into her hand and get her to understand that this means water, and she had that key to language,
Mm-hmm.
and then she could finally learn what everything else was.
There you go.
That's that same thing.
Yeah. I think he talks about it too a lot in terms of cognition as well. I mean, Lewis does this a lot in a lot of his books, but like one of the other books, the Eldil, how you can't see it. Well, you can't. I mean, that's like, I think he basically just copied and pasted that idea and stuck it in Prince Caspian as they're going, as leading them towards Aslan's house, which is like, and use it again. This constant theme of the unseen, and also the cognition that you must have, the way you must wrap your brain around the unseen, even as you're experiencing it, or even before you're experiencing it, to experience it. Getting a little lost in the weeds here. I need to digest this one a little bit more.
So we have epistemological understandings, which is experiential, which is constantly building. Our epistemology doesn't change the ontological reality of what is. But when we bring something unknown into our known, then suddenly we have a broader epistemology, and then we have a closer grasp on the ontological reality. And so, a couple of things for me. One on this, you cannot see things till you roughly know what they are. Watson asked Holmes, how did you see that? And he said, because I was looking for it. Very, very Holmesian right there for him to say you can't see things until you know roughly what they are. But it's the notion of you can see something, but if you have no concept, you're saying, oh, water, I see it, but I don't know how to express this experience that I'm having until you bring language into it, and then you have abstract thoughts, and then you're able to you're able to articulate, oh, this thing that happened to me, or this thing that I see, I think is this. And somebody comes through and says, well, actually, you can define it a little better by saying this. And it says, oh, well, actually, if you can define it a little better. And we should be building in language towards something more precise. And if we get to something precise, then we create more optimal experience and less suffering because we know more what something is. And the closer you can get your epistemology to the ontology, hopefully the more human flourishing you have, and hopefully the more optimal experience that you have. Not always, but that is the goal. And I think this is an interesting. This also plays out through Lewis throughout his entirety. These concepts that Lewis has. What is so amazing is you keep stumbling on them again and again and again. There's not a point where Lewis contradicts his philosophy. When he pulls something, he like tugs on this right here, and you can see pages pucker in transposition. You can see abolition of man. You can see the pages pulling up because he pulls that thread, and you're like, oh, this goes all the way throughout. So his writing is so cohesive. He may not have entirely understood what he was writing here, but as he lived this out, it became more apparent, and it became a better part of his literature, and he was able to create characters more so that come into that. And I just think that's just an awesome way that he pokes the question, and you have to wrestle with that for a second. Wait, you can't see things until you know roughly what they are, and you're like, But the more you think about it, you're like, yeah, I can't know something. I can't know what something is until I have an idea, until I can actually. I mean, kids don't know stoves are hot. They don't know what heat is until they put their hand on a stove, really, or they feel the heat, and they're like, oh, you can tell them this is hot. They're like, that means nothing to me. Oh, that's what hot is. Okay. But they have no concept of it until they actually experience it. And so Ransom has no idea what mitochondria is. He doesn't even know what it is until he experiences it, and then he can begin to understand this is what mitochondria is. And it's completely different than the experience that Weston and Devine are having. And I think that's Lewis. I mean, he plays that out actually, if you would allow me to be so violent with the text, you're like maybe. Doyle does the same thing in Sherlock Holmes. He has Watson and Scotland Yard make these horrible inferences, to make these inductive reasonings that are just pathetic. But then he has Holmes making the inductive reasoning that is correct. And he shows you, this is how you do it poorly. This is how you do it better. In this, Lewis is doing the same thing. He has Watson and Devine saying, this is how you come into a world that's not yours, and this is how you do it poorly. This is where you make all your prejudice and wrong judgments. This is where you do things because you're so stuck in one mindset that you're not open to anything else. And here's a better way to do it, where you say, immerse yourself into the culture and let it come to you. And so he's bringing two different dichotomies of how your perception, how your experience should be in this world. And so good writers do that. They give you both options, and you get to choose which one. And hopefully you choose the better of them. But I think that's why we have heroes and villains, is because one shows you. I mean, Thanos is a great villain, but he's wrong. But he thinks he's right. And that allows us to reason with the notion of, is there such a thing as a compassionate villain? And you're like, well, Thanos would be the compassionate villain. He thinks he's doing a good job. He thinks he's right. But there has to be more than that. There has to be something beyond just thinking that you're right. So Weston is doing this for the sake of humanity. It's for your life is not worth anything for the greater good of human life. So you could even say that there's a little bit of a Thanos thing in Weston here. I'm doing this for the greater good of human life. And Ransom would be like, no, all life is valuable. Not just human life, or not just some human life, but all life. Because it comes from Mueldil, the supreme being. And so,
I think, sorry. Go ahead.
You go. No, I was finished.
I think it's interesting too, because when you boil down the motivations of the villain characters, especially like Weston, it's like he thinks he's doing it for the greater good of humanity, but what he's really doing it for is the greater good of his conception of humanity.
Exactly.
Which is a different thing entirely, because we can do something for the greater good of humanity, and it is a good thing, but if it's not humanity as it is divinely stated,
right,
then it is not for the greater good. It is for our conception of what good is, which is not the same thing as the greater good of humanity.
Which is
it's a distortion of it.
Those people who have the idea of utopia, right? Have they asked others if they want to join in this utopia? Or are they simply going to hoist the utopia upon them and say, no, this is for your greater good, but I don't want that. But no, you don't, just because you don't understand it. Dostoevsky says that even if you were given utopia, humanity would break it just to have something new. Even if you had everything perfect in your utopia. I know Klaus Schwab, is that the guy? Klaus Schwab with the World Economic Forum was like, we're going to create a world where everybody lives within this one range. You can be within wherever you need in 15 minutes. Everything is self-sufficient, all this stuff. And you go, people will live in that for a few years, maybe. And then somebody's going like, I want to go 30 minutes away. Well, I want to go an hour away. Well, I want to travel to the side. And they will literally break it just because we can't stand monotony. We're born explorers. We don't know what we don't know, and we want to know the unknown, and so we're going to go into it. And even if you get, this is better for you. I'm going to risk it. We think about traveling the world in a boat without antibiotics and surgeries and stuff. And you're going to Magellan. You're going to cross the entire world in a ship. What would drive someone to do that? Knowing, you break your arm, break your leg, that could be it. Gangrene sets in, yet they risk it. And so that's just, it's just incredible to have those. The human spirit is both it's both the best thing about us and the worst thing about us. So.
I think it's also, too, that you get something like, you get utopia, you just kind of break it because that's in your nature. Not even necessarily for the sake of exploration, but just because. Yeah,
some will break it just to break it.
Just because, yeah, and also I think because we tire of monotony and then we yearn for something to fulfill us, which is actually Lewis explored a lot in the Hross dialogue as they're preparing to go on talks about why you experience it, why would you want to experience a thing more than once, and it goes into that again in Paralandra, and I think that's also what part of Weston's bent, but more Devine's bent in this book. It's an interesting one.
Well, because I think Lewis also pulls that in again when he brings in, you say, why would someone want to experience something more than once? He brings in nostalgia, right?
Yeah.
Like we want that feeling again because once it happens, I was thinking about a lot of people I know, Deion Sanders, Brad Pitt, and a lot of these people who have reached all of their goals. When they got to the apex, they said, "Surely this is not all. I've experienced this. This is it." Deion Sanders worked his whole life, won the Super Bowl, and after he won it, it was just empty because there was nothing else to strive for. So he would want that feeling again because you want the striving and you get it and then it's gone. And that moment's over with. And then we long for nostalgia to get that moment back. But even if we had in that moment, the nostalgia is better than the moment. And so Lewis plays with that theme a lot throughout his writing, nostalgia and that right there.
The memory of the thing.
The memory of the thing, yes. Yeah.
The utopia thing, thinking God did that with us, right? He gave us utopia and we broke it, just like you mentioned, in the Garden of Eden. So brings me to one of my biggest theological, philosophical questions is how can we possibly be able to handle that satisfaction, for lack of a better word? At some point, if God, if you're a Christian and you believe that God turns us into perfect beings that can be satisfied and fulfilled, it almost seems like this doesn't even seem like a possibility to me.
Right.
But like C.S. also deals with those questions, in The Great Divorce, especially, and I think the last battle of the
Yeah.
this idea of further, and he mentioned going up the mountain, things will, it's almost like there'll never be a mystery. There'll always be more mystery. I think that must be how God can do it. Is He fulfills us, but just enough.
Yeah.
And then there's just more and more and more and more. And I know it's going kind of in a different direction.
No, you're right.
But it's a huge question. It's always been a huge question for me. That's one of the hardest things to imagine. It's how could something be good if I can't understand the bad? I can't understand.
It's like
that's a theme directly from the book too. You talked about that too. Yeah, I think you're totally right. Yeah, you nailed it on the head too with the with the further up and further in concepts, like how can you plumb the depths of the infinite? Like you never will, and yet so it means there always will be more mystery. Totally right on that. And he talks about that too in the. Oh shoot! I lost it. I had it. Well, he talks about it in two places. He talks about one, he actually the greatest gift for him is death, and then the other place talks about it is lost it. Lost it. Dang it! Oh, it was right there.
It'll come back. If it comes back, interrupt me.
Yeah.
Stand up and sit back down.
In The Great Divorce, the philosopher says, I don't want to go anywhere there aren't any questions, if there are only answers. How can there only be answers? And I think one of the things that I would say to this, and I don't know if this helps you or not, it helped me, but knowing that Jesus Christ is the God-man. He is hypostatic union. He is a hybrid creature. There's never been another creature like Jesus. Totally divine, totally human. In this hypostatic union, we are going to be like that. Right now, it's impossible for us to comprehend what it's like to have our humanity fused with his divinity in a hypostatic union. We are going to become hybrid creatures like that, according to the scripture that I read. We're going to be like, we're co-heirs with Christ. We're going to be like Jesus. So in order to be like Jesus, we have to be of the same kind, the same being. We're going through our adoption in this moment, but we have not yet received our promise. The promise is that we will be like him. We will be fused like that. And I think that's what will give us the ability to not fall. And to go back even further, God couldn't create a heaven without a dissatisfied Lucifer and a third of the angels. So even before we get to humanity, that dissatisfaction also existed. Because when you give creatures free will, they are at some point going to choose other than the right thing. Because even angels don't have omniscience. So therefore there's knowledge they don't have. So therefore they will invariably or inevitably make a decision other than God. And at that point, that's missing the mark, and that's sin, and that takes us off course. And so that's the only way it could happen. You got it.
Got it. It's in the part where he's talking about the Tanakh, he talks about how could I ever appreciate my children, life, poetry,
yes.
if I did not have the thing that gave me danger.
Yes.
He goes through that story about going up into the place of Hross, Tanakh, and that danger, and that like bringing him closer to Melildil in that time, and that I think that's a really compelling theological point that there is a necessity to this fallen world in some way. At least that's the point he's making here. That there is a necessity to our being in danger, to our being to our lack of understanding of the temporal, to our bent nature.
What does Worf tell us? What does Worf tell us?
What does Worf tell us? Today's a good day to die.
Today's a good day to die.
Yeah. So it's just I think, and he plays with this theme a lot too in the subsequent books, especially here.
I liked the simple analogy or the simple picture of them calling Weston, Devine, is that bent, and bent minds, which would imply that originally they were straight, and now they're bent, and how it seems like the other man, Ransom's mind is getting straighter and straighter as we're going through the book. I just really the divergent paths really noticeable. Yeah.
Wait till Paralandra.
Yeah.
It's going to get crazy.
Well, that's the great concept that he plays throughout this. Have you guys got to the point where he talks about Thalakandra at all? Is that not yet?
In what way? They mentioned it.
Well, about the Eldil over Thalakandra.
Oh, yeah.
Have we got that far? Have you guys read that yet?
I think it's a little past 2/3.
Okay, all right. So we'll leave that. So we'll bring it up next time, and what you'll see is to me that was one of the coolest concepts that he brought out. The first time I read this was the idea of the bent mind, and so I think that's and that is the thing that he plays with that a lot throughout here, and that dichotomy Let's see. So this is interesting, and I just love the idea of this. It talks about the Wellesian fantasies that we talked about earlier. Spooks on stilts, he said to himself. Surrealistic boogeymen with their long faces. At the same time, a disabling panic of the first moments was ebbing away from him. The idea of suicide was now far from his mind. I love that. I mean, you're millions of miles from your home planet, and yet your suicide is the furthest. You were almost eaten by some sea creature. You're almost given over to Sorns. You're almost shot by Weston and Devine. You're in a jungle all alone, and yet suicide is not on your mind. Like, take the easy way out. He's like, no. He was determined to back his luck to the end. He prayed and felt his knife, and a strange emotion of confidence affection towards himself. He checked himself on the point of saying, "We'll stick to one another." And then he goes through this whole process of having conversations with himself, as if he's another person needing to take care of himself.
It's a very good psychoanalysis. That I will come.
Which I think in that situation you would almost have to have the fracturing of your psyche in order to be able to survive that. You'd have to be able to calm yourself at that point and have you and yourself be something different than one another.
Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson. There you go. And just like David, I just lost him.
Sorry, I threw Wilson in there. Everything gets lost after.
Yeah. So he's having these conversations with himself. And then, after he wakes up from the nap, he's like, who was that guy? Who was that other Ransom? That other fellow? Because that guy, he was tripping. And now I'm under control. I know I'm going to get a drink of water. And so he's getting his legs under him, psychologically speaking. And then he said, I'm going to let those things roll through my mind when I have these weird thoughts. And I thought, that's a great psychological exercise to do when you're in high stress and anxiety. The thoughts that are irrational, let those thoughts roll by, because some sane thoughts are going to roll through as well.
Yeah. This is a technique you use when you're getting angry, irrationally angry, and get a knee-jerk reaction. Some psychologists will say you just imagine yourself standing above yourself, watching these things happen to you, and then you can have the perspective of waiting for that thing to come and go, and then you can return to yourself and go, there it is, now I'm back. And yeah, it's a weird one. I haven't been in the exact same situation, naturally, but I do remember one time, in my later adult life, I think this is the first time I've read this since experiencing this, but being in such a state of utter confusion and disorientation and alienation and panic that I was so incredibly bamboozled in my brain that this whole section didn't make sense to me. Even how a person can be like that in so quickly. And then I had this experience where I was just where I woke up in a strange place, strange country, didn't know where I was super dehydrated, and it just I was so disoriented from lack of sleep that I was just out of my mind. And I remember having similar thoughts, and nothing was coming together. Mine was a bit more extreme than actually what he was talking about, and it was really fascinating looking back on it now after having experienced that. It was wow, who even was that person in that moment? It's
right.
Almost looking back at that moment and going, who was that? Brains are weird. Sum that up. But
Peterson talks about PTSD not necessarily being experiencing a bad thing, but going through something and you doing a behavior that you didn't think you were capable of doing. Either one, submitting to something terrible, or you enacting something terrible. When you come back to yourself, you can't reconcile the fact that you physically, you were the one who did this action, and that causes PTSD.
Differentiation.
Yes. And this is a sort of a thought experiment, too, in something that Jordan Peterson talks about. He says, imagine yourself naked and alone in a forest that you don't know anything about. Everything at that moment is relevant. Is this plant dangerous? Is this ground dangerous? What this water, it looks poisonous. So Ransom is doing this thing. Everything is relevant, and your mind cannot compute everything being relevant. Like we've been sitting here in this room, and some of us have noticed the wallpaper, some of us haven't. Some of us heard the noises in the kitchen, some of us haven't. Some of us thought about the book. We see people around us. We don't see. Most of life is in the background, and it's irrelevant. Only what we think we need to know do we focus on and become relevant. But if you're dropped into a planet 28 million miles away, everything is relevant, and your brain just goes, it's hyperdrive. And then what happens is the next day he wakes up, his brain, he knows things are starting to become a little, I can put this in the background. I can run this code. I can put that code in the back and let that run. Okay, I'm going to get a drink of water. Water's good. Okay, it tastes like minerals, but it's refreshing. Okay, so I don't have to worry about the water being poisonous. I have a source of hydration and stuff. And so it's really cool to see him get to the point where his brain gets to function like a normal brain and things become irrelevant and things become relevant. He can focus on which ones he's supposed to have, as Sherlock Holmes would say, the vital clues and the incidental clues. You need to know which ones are there so you can come to the correct conclusion. So, all right, I think we've got about 2/3 through the book. Did anybody want to talk about? I know we talked a little bit about it, but the hunt, and that was a cool scene when he goes with Hross and he's hunting the what's it called?
No.
Yes, and that was a cool experience because those are one of those things that, and you brought it up, David, about poetry and all that, and living in that danger because that gives you something to live for. And just, I remember John Eldridge talking about in Wild at Heart, it is built into men to want to slay dragons and go into that unknown. And that, to me, that was a truly masculine thing to have happen there. And that's, you get to prove, in a sense, he's proving his manhood. That he can go on this hunt with the rest of the men, and he can come back, and he's earned his stripes. He's run through the gauntlet. He's accepted into the tribe and all that. It's just, it's a beautiful moment of coming of age for an interspecies person to have conquered a great unknown, something that even farther than going out west and, surviving dysentery in the Oregon Trail. Like, you've gone to another planet and you've survived.
You don't survive dysentery on the Oregon Trail.
No, you don't. You'd always die. That is the death sentence.
I like the part he just has decided he can go on the hunt, and he says he was only too well aware that such resolutions may look very different when the moment came, but he felt an unwanted assurance that somehow in another or other he would be able to go through with it. It was necessary, and the necessary was always possible.
Ooh.
Yeah, necessary is always possible.
Necessary.
Yeah.
It's just like Lewis to leave you with some red beef and strong beer right there. That's something to chew on. And I think that's why Lewis never gets old for me, because he always says things in a way that you can't gloss over it, or you'll miss something. And if you don't gloss over it, you're going to find yourself stopping every little bit and just taking a long draft of this and just let me think about that for a minute. The necessary is always possible. And I just love. There are certain people in life that can turn a phrase and illuminate truth through that. And I've always thought Lewis was a person who could, as they say, release the fire in a diamond. When you turn a diamond just slightly, light hits it, and it illuminates so much more in doing that. And, of course, Dumbledore was always one who could turn a phrase and applauds himself in being able to do that. But those are the men I always look to, and well, actually, the women as well. I look to those people who, when they're presented with an argument that's slightly off, and you see that in Paralandra so much, when the arguments are slightly off, in the garden, has God really said? Just let me tell you how I see it from my perspective. And it sounds so close to being true. And yet, when you're off a millimeter down here, by the time you get to the end, you're off by miles. And so when someone's able just to take a thought and turn it back, there's a person that I went to their school in Oxford, and I won't say his name, but he had this great moment. I remember one of the great moments at this talk where this young man stood up and says, "Why are you afraid of moral relativism?" He says, "China's doing it right now, and they're doing all right. People aren't going to be raping and pillaging and stealing and killing people. We're not going to be doing that. Moral relativism is going to work. It's going to be fine. You don't have to be afraid of people." To which this gentleman strolled out to the stage, looked at the young man and says, "Do you lock your doors?" And the guy says, "Yes." He goes, "Why? If you're not afraid, why are you acting out of fear? It's irrational. It goes against your worldview. It goes against your philosophy to lock a door if you're not afraid of that. So why do you lock your door?" It's because he wasn't being honest with himself. And just to have the mental clarity to just turn it back slightly and then illuminate truth. That's what Lewis does so much, is he takes these big philosophical questions that we wrestle with and that seems so daunting. And then he just words it just a little bit different and click, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's the Great Divorce. Let's look at this concept. Wait, there are only answers? There aren't any questions? Wait, So, I really respect Lewis for doing that, and he's always pointing us further up and further in. And that's kind of where I hope to be. And if that's ever said of me on a eulogy somewhere or something, it's like Wes was able to do that. I would consider my life a success. If I lucky enough to get to that point where I can do that.
It's yours for the ride now. I'll come.
Oh well, yeah. What's the price? So we'll finish up the book next time. Be prepared, because I'm betting Caitlin's going to come loaded for bear, so she'll probably have lots of readings and stuff she wants to get to, because she was on fire. So those of you know Caitlin, when she gets on fire, she's on fire. She's on fire. A house burning down. Okay, so we'll finish that, and then the next week, in 2 weeks, we'll start Paralandra. So if you finish this up, you want to jump into Paralandra, go ahead. I'm going to warn you, Paralandra is going to stretch you. The concepts is a mind bender, because it is a good deal of theology and philosophy that you're going to wrestle with. Then when we get to That Hideous Strength, there is some philosophy, but it's more practical things that are going on, and it's more of a novel than it is sort of a theological stealing around the watchful dragons.
Lewis was experimenting with LSD.
What is it? You think Lewis was experimenting with LSD? Wait.
That's when he wrote the last 50 pages.
What's this character doing here? Why? What in the world? Which may give credence to Tolkien saying that Narnia was discombobulated and it was more of a dreamlike, because he just mishmashed a bunch of myths together. So, all right. So that's all for tonight. Thank you guys so much for coming. Further up.
Further in.